Within a landscape governed by the persistent hum of digital platforms, it frequently appears that the fundamental essence of our humanity is inextricably bound to the virtual realm. From the initial seconds of our morning, we are tethered to a relentless flow of notifications, endorsements, and public discourse. There exists a profound societal nudge, and often a baseline expectation, that we must record our existence for public consumption. Our triumphs, our hardships, and our fleeting instances of delight are all cast into the public square to be evaluated, cheered, or eventually disregarded. Consequently, the internal drive to remain active and sustain a digital identity has become an authentic and all-encompassing weight in modern life. Nonetheless, in the heart of this technological saturation, an expanding collective of individuals is opting for a divergent journey. These people consciously distance themselves from the electronic commotion, declining to broadcast their private experiences on global networks. They refrain from uploading imagery, they bypass the ritual of status updates, and they firmly reject the obligation to narrate their every transition. On the surface, such a withdrawal might appear peculiar given how deeply these tools are woven into the fabric of daily survival. Yet one must wonder what motivates this specific departure. What elements of the virtual environment have they decided are better left unexplored? The explanation is rooted deeply in the complex mechanics of the human mind. For many, these platforms are far more than mere utilities. They function as catalysts for tension, exhaustion, and a perpetual cycle of comparison that can slowly dismantle one's sense of value. It is a domain where we frequently calibrate our importance through digital tallies, and where our feeling of community can seem dependent on the scale of our virtual audience. Furthermore, for others, the internet acts as a relentless mirror reflecting just how much of our vulnerability is on display. Our histories, our characters, and our behaviors are perpetually subjected to the observation of strangers. This underlying urge to distribute our lives and be recognized can, at times, become entirely stifling. By electing to retreat from this environment, these individuals reclaim something vital: their mental tranquility, their genuine nature, and most crucially, their autonomy. Opting for stillness in a culture that worships visibility is not merely a gesture of defiance, it is a fundamental act of protecting one's core. It represents a deliberate move to safeguard psychological health and to value one's internal landscape over the shallow and endless diversions of the external world. As we examine the logic behind this path, it becomes evident that those who bypass the social media storm are not dismissing society itself. Rather, they are choosing to fortify their personal boundaries and their identity within an increasingly turbulent electronic era. Hence, we find ourselves asking why certain people avoid this noise and what the mental repercussions of such a choice truly are. We must consider how we can gain wisdom from their resistance to the lure of constant exposure to foster our own harmony and concentration. Throughout the following sections, we shall analyze these inquiries further, investigating the mindset of those who embrace quietude and the advantages gained by stepping out of the digital glare. We will reveal how bypassing social media can serve as a potent instrument for self-regulation, emotional stability, and lasting inner calm. In doing so, we will realize how the straightforward decision to remain private can restore something that is becoming remarkably scarce: mastery over our own narratives and our own thoughts. Chapter 1: The Virtue of Quietude. In the present era, where broadcasting is the standard and being seen is frequently confused with achievement, the merit of silence can feel almost unrecognizable. We exist in a period where our private journeys are perpetually exhibited. From the moment of waking, we are prompted to log our movements, whether through a visual record of a meal, a brief update from a fitness center, or a commentary on our current mood. These networks have effectively dissolved the barrier between the intimate and the public, making it quite easy to become reliant on external validation through metrics and followers. The primary concern remains, within this overwhelming surge of constant transparency, what occurs when we choose to stay unspoken. Silence represents significantly more than a lack of sound. It is a robust mechanism for regaining authority over our direction and our feelings. Selecting a quiet path, particularly regarding online presence, is a strategic move for self-preservation. It is a preference for serenity over external praise, for sincerity over imitation, and for meaningful bonds over superficial engagements. When we decide to keep the intricacies of our lives to ourselves, we are doing more than simply withholding data. We are vigorously defending our cognitive territory and emotional health. In a society that often feels excessively loud, this stillness transforms into a sanctuary. It offers the necessary room for contemplation, evolution, and internal searching. By moving away from the incessant demand to broadcast and compare, we generate a chance to reunite with our true selves. We can ponder our emotions and our aspirations without the external interference of public opinion or the heavy burden of social conformity. Within this quiet, we attain a sense of clarity. We develop the capacity to recognize our own inner truth amidst the turbulence of the electronic world. This decision to embrace a quieter existence is not a matter of withdrawing from society. Rather, it is about interacting with our surroundings based on our own personal standards. It involves the establishment of healthy boundaries that safeguard our emotional vitality and psychological stability. The relentless drive to broadcast every life event frequently results in mental exhaustion, persistent worry, and a diluted sense of identity. We might find ourselves existing merely for the approval of onlookers, gauging our personal value by the digital metrics of social feedback. Silence grants us the permission to exit that exhausting loop and redefine the concepts of achievement and contentment according to our individual values. Furthermore, we should envision an existence where we are no longer shackled to the perpetual requirement for outside approval, a life where our dignity is not calculated by the volume of people viewing our content or the intensity of the spotlight we attract. Instead, we gain the autonomy to live with total sincerity, selecting the specific times and topics we wish to disclose without the heavy weight of obligation. This liberation represents the true essence of quietude, the capacity to defend your personal environment, your serenity, and your genuine spirit. Hence we find ourselves asking how we might develop this inner strength. How can we opt for stillness in a civilization that perpetually demands we be vocal, transparent, and performative? The initial phase involves acknowledging the inherent worth of tranquility within our daily routines. It requires being fully anchored in the current second without the secondary urge to document it for a public audience. It is about discovering how to cherish the modest, hushed instances that truly characterize our character, rather than those moments manufactured solely to dazzle others or secure temporary fame. When we commit to the path of discretion, we are essentially granting ourselves the right to be real. We are deciding to sever ties with the surrounding clamor, to cease acting for an unseen gallery, and to begin existing for our own fulfillment. This lack of broadcasting is not a vacuum. It is a fertile landscape for personal evolution, deep contemplation, and internal harmony. It serves as the bedrock upon which we can construct a more resilient and centered realization of our own identity. The influence of such composure is truly significant, as it permits us to regain mastery over our trajectories and our cognitive processes. It empowers us to distance ourselves from the turbulence of digital networks and find our way back to our authentic nature. By welcoming this quietude, we are not merely shielding our psychological wellness, we are cultivating our individual advancement, our self-regulation, and our mental calm. In the subsequent section, we will examine more closely the apprehension regarding public scrutiny and the reasons so many of us feel compelled to broadcast every facet of our journey. We will analyze how the dread of being evaluated or ignored can force us to chase endless approval, and how liberating ourselves from this compulsion can result in profound emotional independence and a sense of personal strength. Chapter 2: The Dread of Public Scrutiny. In our current electronic era, we are under constant invitation to reveal our private lives to the global community. From the most trivial occurrences to the most impactful milestones, the narrative suggests that transparency is a requirement rather than an option. Digital platforms flourish within this atmosphere of visibility, and it has become a standard expectation that we offer our lives for collective observation. However, for a specific demographic, this level of transparency is not an act of freedom, it is a source of profound unease. The anxiety associated with being seen online is an authentic and frequently paralyzing phenomenon. When we transmit information into the digital void, we make ourselves vulnerable to the opinions of the masses. We surrender the ability to manage our own reputation, granting others the authority to label or characterize us. This deficit of authority resides at the core of the apprehension regarding visibility. It transcends simple concerns over privacy. It is a fundamental worry about how external parties will translate our statements, visuals, and deeds. The risk of being misinterpreted, unfairly evaluated, or condemned is sufficient to cause many to bypass the digital stage entirely. For a great number of individuals, this unease is firmly anchored in a craving for social acceptance. As communal beings, we naturally desire to be welcomed by the group. Within the virtual landscape, digital endorsements and remarks have evolved into a type of social credit. The more we reveal, the more we anticipate receiving this currency from our peers. Yet, excessive transparency leaves us open to potential emotional distress. This is the origin of the anxiety, the worry that we might fall short of expectations, the dread of being discarded, or the fear that our flaws will be highlighted for the world to see. The persistent demand to present a perfected version of oneself can generate an intense feeling of exposure. We often feel as though we are navigating a narrow path between honest self-expression and the necessity of meeting cultural benchmarks. This apprehension regarding external critique frequently prompts us to sanitize our experiences, obscure certain traits, or withdraw from the act of sharing altogether. However, we must consider the possibility of liberating ourselves from this particular trepidation. What if we possess the capacity to acknowledge the reality of public visibility without permitting it to dominate our psyche? What if we could seize the authority over our own personal histories and refuse to allow the collective gaze to dictate our identity? The secret to moving past the dread of scrutiny is found in recognizing the vital role of boundaries and the necessity of guarding our internal cognitive environment. Opting to keep certain aspects of our journey away from the digital sphere is not an act of being intentionally elusive or disconnected. Rather, it is a focused effort to master what we reveal and what we retain as sacred. It is an intentional move to shield our emotional stability and ensure that outside influences are not the primary architects of our self-image. Furthermore, as we cease to pursue external approval, we initiate the process of restructuring our self-esteem according to our own principles. While the anxiety of being seen can feel restrictive, it also holds the potential for great liberation. By acquiring the skill to establish robust limits and governing the flow of our information, we can dismantle the tension that accompanies perpetual transparency. This allows us to embrace our core identity without the haunting concern of being criticized or excluded. When we make the conscious choice to defend our private territory and emotional vigor, we generate the autonomy required to exist with genuine intent and a lack of fear. Hence, we find that in the coming section, we will examine the critical function of personal boundaries in sustaining our psychological and emotional equilibrium. We will analyze how defining clear limits not only safeguards our internal serenity but also grants us the power to live with greater sincerity and assurance, even when the surrounding culture exerts immense pressure to follow the crowd. Chapter 3: The Consequences for Psychological Wellness. Within a landscape where digital networks have woven themselves into the fabric of our daily routines, it is impossible to overlook the profound effect they exert on our mental state. Although these platforms offer certain advantages, such as bridging geographical gaps and offering a stage for individual expression, they simultaneously introduce a variety of psychological and emotional obstacles. The relentless influx of news, alerts, and visual stimuli can frequently result in a sense of deficiency, restlessness, and total mental drain. The repercussions for our mental wellness are not always immediately apparent. We may perceive ourselves as being involved and socially linked, yet the habitual impulse to monitor our streams and remain current can lead to a state of profound emotional fatigue. Research indicates that dedicating excessive energy to these platforms can actually intensify feelings of solitude and detachment, despite the appearance of digital interaction. This contradiction arises because, while we are technically linked to others through screens, we frequently sacrifice the deep, significant bonds that are forged through physical, face-to-face engagement. The perpetual cycle of polished and edited imagery found online also fosters a culture of detrimental comparison. We evaluate our own lives based on the highlight reels of others, which represent only their most favorable moments, leading to a diminished view of our own circumstances. This can trigger a decline in self-regard and a warped perception of our own value. We may start to convince ourselves that our daily existence lacks the vibrancy or satisfaction seen in others, which breeds resentment and a lack of fulfillment. Furthermore, the expectation to constantly stage a digital performance, such as capturing the ideal image or articulating the perfect thought, can manifest as a source of persistent tension. The concern that we might fail to reach the idealized benchmarks set by our peers can be stifling, particularly when these platforms become the primary source of our self-affirmation. This reliance on outside approval creates a harmful loop where our sense of self becomes anchored to digital engagement metrics. When these figures do not meet our expectations, the resulting impact on our temperament and self-image can be quite damaging. Moreover, the influence on our psychological state extends even further. The virtual environment is often characterized by extreme emotional shifts, where peaks of thrill are rapidly replaced by valleys of annoyance or gloom. This fluctuating experience can result in emotional volatility, making it increasingly difficult to find a stable sense of harmony and health. The more we immerse ourselves in the social media landscape, the more we may feel as though we are caught in a turbulent sea, struggling to locate a steady and grounded perspective. The encouraging reality is that we are not destined to remain captive to this exhausting rhythm. By retreating and assuming authority over our electronic tendencies, we can initiate the process of safeguarding our psychological fitness. This transformation begins with the honest admission of how digital platforms influence our internal state and the ability to detect when they start to diminish our vitality. We possess the power to take deliberate actions to limit our exposure, establishing firm parameters that defend our emotional and cognitive stability. Furthermore, implementing intentional departures from the virtual world, engaging in present moment awareness, and prioritizing tangible, face-to-face connections can facilitate the return of equilibrium and lessen the detrimental effects these networks have on our psyche. Rather than leaning on the fragile praise of anonymous users, we can cultivate the skill of self-validation, constructing a more robust sense of dignity that is not tethered to external consent. While the psychological consequences of digital immersion are substantial, they are by no means lasting. By becoming more observant of our online behaviors and mastering the art of setting limits, we can shield our emotional core. In doing so, we successfully reclaim mastery over our mental health and discover a sense of calm within a landscape that frequently feels excessive. Hence, we find that in the following section, we will analyze the function of personal limits in maintaining our mental wellness and how defining specific boundaries can assist us in recovering our moments, our vitality, and our internal quiet. By gaining the ability to institute these restrictions in both the virtual and physical domains, we move closer toward fostering a more wholesome and harmonized existence. Chapter 4: The Necessity of Limits. In a society where the boundaries between one's intimate life and their public image have grown increasingly indistinct, the act of defining personal limits has become a vital necessity. These parameters extend far beyond the concept of physical room. They include emotional, cognitive, and technological boundaries that serve to protect our overall health. We are currently navigating an era where the fusion of social networks, professional obligations, and constant accessibility has made it challenging to identify the point where our private essence concludes and our public persona begins. Without the presence of transparent limits, we risk falling into a state of total saturation, fatigue, and a profound alienation from our authentic character. The requirement for such structure emerges when we observe that external influences are perpetually tugging us in conflicting ways. From the relentless requirements of the workplace to the social obligation of digital participation, it often feels as though our hours and our spirit are no longer under our own command. We distribute so much of our inner self to others, be it through social commitments, online presence, or professional duties, that we eventually lose perspective on our true priorities. Our tranquility, our precious moments, and our emotional strength are often squandered on activities that deplete us, leaving almost nothing for the pursuits that feed our spirit and bolster our mental resilience. Establishing these boundaries is an essential gesture of self-preservation and personal dignity. It serves as a declaration that one's peace, energy, and time are of significant value. The difficulty lies in acknowledging that creating these rules is not an act of narcissism or an attempt to isolate oneself. Rather, it is about fortifying your foundation so that you can navigate life as your most capable self. It is about making sure that your mental and emotional environment stays protected, untouched by the pressures of others that do not support your personal welfare. The absence of such structure is frequently tied to a deep-seated urge to satisfy others or a perceived duty to remain perpetually reachable. We often harbor a dread of failing someone, causing letdowns, or being viewed as self-centered and cold. However, this specific anxiety can trap us in a spiral of chronic exhaustion and bitterness. By providing an affirmative response to every external demand, we are essentially declining our own needs. We permit outside forces to govern our schedule and our focus, which leaves very little space for the elements that truly define a good life: our physical health, our deep connections, our creative drives, and our own joy. A primary obstacle to forming these boundaries is the modern conviction that we must be accessible at every hour, particularly in this technological epoch. With the rise of mobile devices and real-time communication, it is quite simple to feel forced to answer every digital prompt or notification without delay. Yet, this state of perpetual readiness exacts a heavy price on our psychological state. We are always active, reacting to the world's calls and never truly permitting ourselves the chance to unwind or restore our strength. This relentless involvement can lead directly to persistent worry, burnout, and a feeling of being submerged. The fundamental truth remains that we are under no obligation to be constantly reachable by the world. Establishing these limits entails seizing command of our hours and our inner drive, placing our health at the forefront, and developing the strength to decline requests when it is appropriate. It involves carving out a sanctuary for the pursuits that truly sustain us, whether that means engaging in meaningful moments with family, following a creative passion, or simply enjoying a period of repose. By defining these transparent parameters, we grant ourselves the autonomy to concentrate on our core values instead of perpetually reacting to the external pressures of society. Hence, we find ourselves asking how to initiate this process in a culture that seems to demand our uninterrupted focus. The primary movement involves validating the necessity of these limits and comprehending why they are fundamental to our psychological prosperity. This requires the realization that it is perfectly acceptable to say no and that our personal resources are precious. It means internalizing the fact that there is no moral requirement to answer every digital alert or message the moment it arrives. We possess the inherent right to decide the timing and manner of our social interactions, and we can institute restrictions to shield our emotional and mental state. Furthermore, one of the most vital areas for regulation involves our technological habits. The world of digital platforms and constant access can be draining, making it all too easy to fall into a pattern of seeking approval or engaging in comparison. Developing digital boundaries means carving out deliberate windows of time to step away from our screens, allowing ourselves to be fully anchored in the present without the interruption of alerts. This might be as basic as dedicating specific hours where social feeds are avoided or silencing devices during shared meals and personal reflections. In doing so, we recover our vitality and foster a more balanced partnership with the tools we use. In addition to managing our devices, it is equally important to define our emotional and cognitive borders. Emotional limits are designed to prevent our inner feelings from being depleted by the excessive requirements of those around us. This could involve distancing ourselves from one-sided relationships or removing ourselves from harmful atmospheres that leave us feeling hollow. Similarly, mental boundaries involve safeguarding our perspectives and beliefs from being overwhelmed by external agendas. This might manifest as rejecting self-criticism or reducing the time spent on ventures that trigger high levels of tension. Furthermore, the act of setting limits must include dedicated time for personal restoration. Recharging one's spirit is not an indulgence, it is a vital requirement for a stable life. Making space to relax and nourish our own health is critical for keeping our lives in harmony. When we ignore this need, we invite the risk of total exhaustion and emotional bankruptcy. Whether we choose a quiet walk in the woods, the pages of a book, a moment of meditation, or simply a period of stillness, these acts of care help us return to our center and replenish our strength. Moreover, these parameters are essential for the health of our personal connections. Authentic bonds are constructed on a foundation of shared regard and clarity. When we establish our needs, we demonstrate to others that we hold ourselves and our time in high esteem. We essentially educate others on how to engage with us and what behaviors are welcome in our presence. In the context of relationships, this means having transparent and sincere dialogues about our requirements. It involves being vocal about the need for solitude, the need for assistance, or the necessity of a refusal. By doing so, we foster deeper and more equitable connections where everyone involved feels honored. Ultimately, the journey of defining these boundaries is one that requires patience and repetitive effort. It demands a high degree of self-perception, kindness toward oneself, and the bravery to stand firm. This transition may feel challenging at first, particularly if we have spent a lifetime allowing external forces to direct our path. However, as we continue to practice this discipline, it becomes an instinctive part of our character. Eventually, we will feel a greater sense of authority, confidence, and serenity. These limits are not barriers intended to isolate us. They are the protective gateways that ensure our mental and emotional sanctuary remains secure. These parameters empower us to exist with total sincerity, ensuring we are not submerged by the relentless requirements of the external environment. By defining such limits, we assume full authority over our personal trajectories and our psychological wellness. We successfully carve out a sanctuary for the elements of life that possess genuine significance: our creative drives, our intimate bonds, and our holistic health. Establishing these transparent guidelines grants us the liberty to navigate existence according to our individual principles, rather than being perpetually tugged toward conflicting agendas. Hence, we find that in the coming section, we shall examine the merit of solitude as a vehicle for fortifying our identity and nurturing internal tranquility. We will analyze how being alone provides a unique window for self-realization and advancement, and how mastering the art of enjoying one's own company can lead to a far more rewarding life. Chapter 5: The Gravity of Social Contrast. In a landscape governed by virtual networks where edited visuals and idealized existences are perpetually showcased, the act of comparing oneself to others has emerged as a dominant theme in our daily experience. It has become nearly impossible to navigate a digital feed without being confronted by the peak moments of another person's journey. Whether it is a meticulously composed image, a scenic getaway, or the public celebration of a milestone, we are continuously met with the most polished versions of other people's realities. This environment easily traps us in a repetitive loop of assessment, where we calibrate our own value based on the digital fragments others choose to broadcast. Yet one must consider the consequences when this habit of contrast transforms into a corrosive influence on our spirit. Measuring ourselves against our peers is a fundamental human tendency. We are naturally designed to look at those around us to determine our own standing within the social hierarchy. This is a profound instinct, born from an ancient necessity to find belonging and achieve status within a collective group. However, when this evaluation becomes a constant background noise, it can dismantle our self-assurance, breed a sense of deficiency, and fundamentally sabotage our joy. The core issue resides in the method of our comparison and specifically, the distorted data we are using. Digital platforms serve to magnify this phenomenon, as they are specifically engineered to highlight the most filtered and refined aspects of human existence. We witness only a tiny percentage of the actual truth, often remaining oblivious to the hardships, flaws, or private battles that exist behind those perfect frames. Furthermore, even with a logical understanding of this distortion, we frequently find ourselves weighing our authentic, unedited lives against the glossy, manufactured versions presented by others. This leads to the false conclusion that everyone else possesses a superior existence, that they are more prosperous, more physically appealing, more talented, or simply more joyful than we are. The fundamental flaw in this comparison is that it relies on a fragmented narrative. We are essentially weighing our private doubts and vulnerabilities against someone else's public highlights. Consequently, we fail to recognize our own unique triumphs and the steady progress we have made. The deeper we fall into this habit, the more we obsess over what we lack rather than honoring what we possess. It evolves into a rhythm of unhappiness and internal judgment where the feeling of being enough remains perpetually out of reach. This can result in persistent tension, a heavy mood, and a fractured perception of our own importance. One of the most destructive elements of this constant contrast is that it robs us of the capacity to find peace in our current circumstances. We begin to harbor the belief that our happiness is contingent upon meeting the benchmarks established by the crowd. This generates a relentless pressure to mirror the latest movements, to maintain a specific aesthetic, or to accumulate more accolades simply to feel deserving of respect. In the process, we lose sight of our fundamental priorities, our personal contentment, our health, and our individual sense of purpose. The solution for escaping this cycle of comparison is to acknowledge that our inherent worth is never dictated by our rank relative to others. Each of us is a singular entity with a distinct set of capabilities, virtues, and paths. Instead of fixating on the possessions or actions of others, we must redirect our focus inward, concentrating on our own evolution, our milestones, and the specific activities that ignite our inner light. This tendency to measure our worth against others often originates from a deficiency in self-perception and personal acceptance. When we fully adopt our true identity, including our imperfections, the impulse to participate in social contrast begins to fade. We learn to treasure our individual contributions and honor our specific trajectory, liberated from the weight of outside opinions. A primary movement in dismantling the harmful consequences of comparison is the active cultivation of gratitude. By dedicating time to acknowledge our current blessings, our milestones, our bonds, and our internal evolution, we successfully pivot our attention away from perceived deficits toward the abundance we already hold. Gratitude empowers us to honor our unique path without the perceived necessity of competition, helping us recognize the inherent value in our own existence rather than seeking external confirmation. Furthermore, it is essential to regulate our proximity to the origins of these feelings. If digital platforms are triggering sensations of deficiency or resentment, it is likely necessary to pause or distance ourselves from profiles that encourage those emotions. We have the power to organize our virtual environments to prioritize content that offers genuine inspiration, promotes a constructive mindset, or reflects our core principles. By being intentional about our information consumption, we mitigate the friction of comparison and foster a more nourishing digital experience. It is equally vital to keep in mind that every individual navigates their own hardships, even if those struggles remain hidden from public view. A flawless digital image does not signify a life devoid of obstacles. We frequently overlook the private complexities that never reach the screen. Recognizing that everyone is engaged in their own silent battles makes it significantly easier to release the urge to compare. Hence, we find that constant comparison also erodes our sense of individual identity. When our focus is perpetually external, we risk losing the connection to our authentic nature. We may begin to define our existence through cultural benchmarks rather than our own innate aspirations and values. This creates a profound gap between our genuine spirit and the version of ourselves we present to the collective. To bridge this divide, we must prioritize authenticity, refusing to conform to an external template, and instead celebrating the distinct traits that define us. The more we occupy our true selves, the less influence external comparisons can exert over our lives. The reality remains that there will always be someone who appears more composed, more prosperous, or more visually striking. However, these perceptions do not detract from your inherent dignity. Your journey is incomparable, and the path you occupy is exclusively yours. True achievement is not calculated through a lens of rivalry. It is found in how we support our own growth, how we evolve, and how we live in harmony with our personal truth. In the following section, we will analyze how to let go of the craving for constant affirmation and how the practice of solitude can assist in the rediscovery of our core identity. By learning to exist without the requirement of external praise, we can foster a deeper sense of self-awareness, assurance, and internal harmony. Chapter 6: The Fallacy of Flawlessness. Within the landscape of digital networks, the concept of being perfect is frequently placed on a pedestal. As we move through our streams, we encounter meticulously designed visuals representing absolute beauty, triumph, and contentment. It often seems as though everyone else has mastered the complexities of life, with every detail of their existence appearing impeccably arranged. Yet these depictions are merely a mirage, the false notion that existence must be without error and that we must perpetually present an idealized version of ourselves. The truth is that such flawlessness does not exist, and the drive to reach this impossible standard is both draining and detrimental to the soul. When we pursue an ideal state with no room for error, we invite feelings of deficiency, irritation, and a sense of being undeserving. We may fall into the trap of believing that our daily lives, our physical forms, and our milestones are insufficient unless they align with the polished benchmarks of the crowd. We weigh our mundane, unfiltered reality against the heavily refined narratives of others, which naturally breeds discontent. What we frequently overlook is that this image of perfection is often a manufactured front, a strategic veil that obscures the vulnerabilities and hardships that are universal to the human experience. The hazard of perfectionism resides in its inherent impossibility. Regardless of our accomplishments, or the intensity of our efforts, there remains an endless horizon of further objectives to pursue and facets to refine. This quest for the ideal transforms into a relentless cycle, leaving us in a state of perpetual frustration with our current standing. We endure a constant sensation of inadequacy, even when we are exerting our maximum effort, because flawlessness is not a static destination, it is a shifting target that remains forever beyond our grasp. Furthermore, when we overemphasize an impeccable outcome, we overlook the profound elegance found in the irregular. Existence is not defined by being without fault, it is defined by being genuine. The instances that carry the most weight, those that foster true belonging, satisfaction, and serenity, are frequently disordered, unplanned, and raw. These are the moments characterized by self-reflection, learning through error, and welcoming the inherent randomness of the journey. It is within these unpolished experiences that actual evolution occurs, where sincere bonds are formed, and where authentic delight is discovered. Hence we find that perfectionism also fuels the machinery of social comparison. Virtual networks frequently broadcast an artificial standard of living where only the summit of experience is visible, the most flattering imagery, the peaks of career success, and the brightest smiles. It is remarkably easy to believe the fallacy that the lives of others are seamless while our own feels disorganized and broken. This contrast establishes a deceptive narrative, suggesting we must endlessly chase the same degree of flawlessness that others appear to have mastered. In this pursuit, we ignore the fundamental truth that those we admire are equally human, fragile, and incomplete. The demand to present a perfect facade does more than merely bruise our self-regard. It profoundly dictates our psychological and emotional wellness. This drive is frequently associated with heightened tension, low moods, and chronic stress. The persistent internal requirement to satisfy impossible benchmarks inevitably leads to mental fatigue and total depletion. We become so preoccupied with the destination of perfection that we abandon our core priorities, our vitality, our intimate connections, and our basic joy. We find ourselves dismissing self-care and pushing past our emotional limits in service of a goal that cannot be reached. Whereas the actual truth is that we are under no obligation to be perfect. There is no requirement for us to remain impeccably composed at all times. In reality, it is our very inconsistencies that forge our identity. Our minor failings, our peculiar traits, and our personal hurdles are the elements that characterize us and ensure our experiences are singular. Welcoming our flaws permits us to exist with greater sincerity, to dismantle the urge to perform for others, and to concentrate on the activities that yield genuine fulfillment and peace. The primary transition toward honoring the imperfect involves a fundamental shift in perspective. Rather than perceiving a flaw as a source of embarrassment, we must recognize it as a cornerstone of the human condition. Reaching an ideal state is not the objective. Instead, the focus should remain on evolution, education, and individual progress. By accepting our total selves, inclusive of every error and shortcoming, we can start to dismantle the heavy expectations we have historically carried. Furthermore, a potent method for releasing this pressure is the active practice of self-kindness. We are frequently our own most relentless adversaries, subjecting ourselves to harsh critiques for failing to meet self-imposed standards. However, by approaching our internal world with gentleness and understanding, we cultivate a landscape for self-acceptance. Instead of punishing ourselves for a misstep, we can view these occurrences as vital lessons. By extending the same grace to ourselves that we would offer a close companion, we begin to mend the internal fractures caused by the pursuit of the ideal. Another strategy to embrace the unpolished is to prioritize the process rather than the final product. Instead of obsessing over the achievement of a flawless result, we can discover how to take pleasure in the act of creation itself. Life is not merely a collection of destinations, it is the sum of the experiences gathered along the path. When we redirect our focus from the end goal to the individual steps taken, we liberate ourselves from the weight of expectation and invite a greater sense of ingenuity, autonomy, and satisfaction. Ultimately, perfection is not the barometer for success or contentment. Achievement is measured by advancement, and happiness is found in being at peace with who we are and the distance we have traveled. The secret to a meaningful existence lies not in the absence of flaws, but in valuing the beauty they provide. When we relinquish the demand for perfection, we are free to live more vibrantly, more honestly, and with a far deeper sense of tranquility. In the subsequent section, we will analyze how detaching from the hunger for external validation enables us to live with more freedom and sincerity. We will examine the necessity of locating serenity within and how welcoming periods of solitude can offer the necessary environment to evolve, ponder, and reconnect with our essential nature. Chapter 7: The Advantages of Disengagement. In a society that perpetually demands our participation and connectivity, the concept of detachment may initially appear as a distant or unfamiliar philosophy. We are often conditioned to believe that constant involvement with individuals, concepts, and global occurrences is the mandatory price of achievement and belonging. Digital platforms have merely magnified this expectation, fostering an environment where we are pressured to remain perpetually accessible and reactive to every external shift. However, one must consider if detachment, the deliberate act of withdrawing and severing these digital ties, might actually be the primary gateway to a more harmonious and satisfying existence. Furthermore, true detachment should not be confused with emotional coldness or a total retreat from society. It is not about isolating oneself or shunning meaningful bonds. Instead, it is the practice of establishing a supportive emotional buffer between oneself and the forces that deplete your spirit or disrupt your internal calm. This philosophy centers on the capacity to relinquish the exhausting desire to dominate every circumstance or person in your orbit. By letting go of a rigid fixation on specific results, we learn to accept the natural flow of life without becoming ensnared in the tension and emotional turbulence that typically follow our attempts at control. Hence, we find that the most significant benefit of this distance is the protection of our psychological wellness. When we tether our identity too tightly to specific goals, people, or external factors, we essentially surrender our personal authority. We begin to calibrate our worth based on how we are perceived, our level of visible success, or the volume of attention we command. These external affirmations, though temporarily soothing, are inherently unstable and frequently leave us feeling hollow. Detachment empowers us to release these fragile anchors and discover a sense of stability within our own being, entirely independent of the world's fluctuating opinions. In the realm of personal connections, this practice involves defining emotional parameters that prevent us from relying on others to provide our sense of joy or value. It is entirely possible to offer deep affection and care without making our well-being dependent on the recipient. This does not imply being unreachable or cold. Rather, it is about preserving a distinct sense of self and emotional autonomy so that we remain whole while supporting others. By adopting this perspective, we foster more resilient bonds where we contribute freely without the weight of expectation and provide love without being consumed by a hunger for external approval. Moreover, detachment liberates us from the emotional instability caused by clinging to rigid expectations. We frequently impose immense burdens upon ourselves to reach certain milestones or satisfy the benchmarks set by our peers. When reality diverges from these plans, the result is often irritation, letdown, or a feeling of personal failure. However, by loosening our grip on these outcomes, we can pivot our focus toward the current moment and honor the progress we have already realized. We learn to value the process itself, finding merit in the journey rather than obsessing over a final destination. Within the digital landscape, this form of disengagement is uniquely transformative. Social media is strategically crafted to maintain our attention, encouraging us to seek metrics and participate in constant comparison. The more we invest in our virtual masks, the further we drift from our authentic nature. We might begin to quantify our dignity through digital endorsements rather than recognizing our inherent merit. Severing the need for virtual validation allows us to take back the reins of our self-regard, redirecting our energy toward what truly counts: our tangible relationships, our individual evolution, and our cognitive health. Ultimately, detachment serves as a vital instrument for stress regulation. In a high-speed world that demands our constant attention, it is incredibly easy to feel submerged by the expectations of others. The pressure to stay informed and accessible can lead to total depletion. Detachment provides the necessary breathing room to retreat from these demands and replenish our vitality. When we create this space, we grant ourselves permission to decelerate and align with our core values. This intentional distance ensures we remain centered and resilient, allowing us to navigate the surrounding disorder without being swept away by it. Engaging in the practice of detachment does not imply a lack of concern for other individuals or personal ambitions. Instead, it signifies that one has ceased to permit external conditions to dictate their internal happiness or sense of value. This transition allows for actions that are guided by individual principles and authentic desires, rather than a sense of duty or the dread of social critique. It is essentially the art of maintaining a balance between profound empathy and the refusal to be submerged by variables that exist beyond one's personal influence. Consequently, one of the most significant rewards of this mindset is the cultivation of a stable internal harmony. By releasing the grip on external validation, flawlessness, and total authority, we liberate ourselves from the exhausting peaks and valleys caused by shifting circumstances. We develop the capacity to locate tranquility within our own being, regardless of the turbulence in the surrounding environment. This serenity is not anchored to public success or the consent of others. It is a resilient and enduring fulfillment that originates from a deep internal well. Furthermore, the practical application of detachment can manifest in diverse ways throughout our lives. It might involve the establishment of firm schedules for one's time, the courage to decline energy-depleting requests, or the decision to distance oneself from harmful social circles and atmospheres. It could also involve a temporary withdrawal from digital networks to prioritize personal requirements and abandon the instinct to satisfy every outside expectation. Regardless of the specific method, this process empowers an individual to recover their vitality, their composure, and their core identity. Hence, we find that in the following section, we shall examine how welcoming solitude can further strengthen our ability to separate from the world's clamor and reunite with our essential spirit. We will analyze how periods of isolation can result in a more profound self-perception, accelerated individual evolution, and a more robust foundation of mental calm. Chapter 8: Discovering Serenity in Aloneness. In a landscape that perpetually champions social links and constant engagement, the concept of solitude is frequently misinterpreted. There is a common cultural belief that being by oneself is synonymous with being lonely, and that authentic joy is strictly reserved for those who are perpetually surrounded by a crowd. Virtual platforms, with their endless flow of content and social interactions, serve to reinforce this perspective. The prevailing message suggests that our fulfillment is directly proportional to the scale of our network. However, one must consider if being alone, far from being a state to avoid, is actually the vital instrument for achieving internal peace and a more meaningful relationship with our true selves. It is important to clarify that solitude is distinctly different from the pain of loneliness. While the latter is defined by a sense of isolation and a craving for external companionship, solitude is the condition of being alone without experiencing that void. It is a deliberate and conscious preference to spend time in one's own company, to sever ties with the external commotion, and to cultivate the landscape of the mind. Within this quiet space, we are liberated from the diversions and requirements of those around us, allowing us to find our way back to our authentic character without the secondary urge to find approval from an observer. Whereas in our current high-speed era, such quietude has become an increasingly scarce resource. We are perpetually tethered to devices, always reachable, and constantly in a state of activity. The drive to remain involved, whether through professional duties, digital networks, or social circles, often eliminates the necessary room for deep thought and internal searching. The fundamental truth remains that clarity and composure are impossible to achieve if we are perpetually drowned in noise. To truly perceive our internal dialogue, process our complex feelings, and contemplate our trajectory, we must be intentional about carving out moments for undisturbed solitude. The strength of being alone resides in its capacity to facilitate a return to our genuine nature. In these moments, we are no longer swayed by the judgments of others, the interruptions of technology, or the heavy weight of cultural benchmarks. We are granted the freedom to navigate our personal reflections, sensations, and aspirations without interference. Solitude provides the essential environment to address the most significant inquiries of existence. What are our true objectives? What are the core values that define us? What obstacles are preventing us from living with total sincerity? Moreover, dedicating time to oneself serves as a fertile ground for individual advancement. Within the quiet, we can participate in rituals that nourish the intellect, the physique, and the spirit. Whether this involves the study of literature, the act of writing, the practice of meditation, or simply resting in stillness, these phases of contemplation offer vital insight into our goals and our broader purpose. Solitude acts as a catalyst for innovation, heightens our awareness of self, and assists us in uncovering hidden facets of our character that are often obscured by the daily grind. Despite these benefits, many people avoid their own company because they are apprehensive about confronting their private thoughts or unresolved emotions. We exist in a society that champions perpetual busyness, where diversions are constantly within our reach. However, by yielding to these distractions, we avoid the demanding task of self-examination and emotional resolution. We often suppress our sentiments, overlook our requirements, and remain estranged from our authentic nature. Solitude, conversely, offers the vital opening to address these internal states and navigate through them. It is within the hushed instances of being alone that we can synthesize grief, apprehension, sorrow, or doubt, eventually reconciling with the factors that may be hindering our progress. Furthermore, quietude instructs us to be at ease in our own company. In a civilization that frequently equates social frequency with personal value, it can be arduous to accept that being alone does not reflect one's worth or desirability. We might feel a societal weight to perpetually surround ourselves with others or to saturate every minute with interaction. Yet, the reality remains that our dignity is not a byproduct of our social standing or our external connections. It originates from within. When we learn to welcome solitude, we are essentially learning to honor ourselves. We foster an internal tranquility that remains unaffected by outside variables, cultivating a more profound link to our singular identity. Hence we find that in stillness, we also attain clarity. The persistent commotion of daily existence can often obscure our reasoning and obstruct our capacity to make decisive choices. When we dedicate time to being alone, we permit the intellect to decelerate and our thoughts to settle. Within this calm, we gain significant insight into our ambitions, our bonds, and our life path. Solitude offers the cognitive landscape necessary to process intricate emotions, ponder past events, and construct a vision for the future. Beyond psychological wellness, these periods of isolation can also enhance physical vitality. By severing ties with the relentless requirements of others and the overstimulation of modern technology, we allow our systems to truly unwind. This practice mitigates tension, encourages relaxation, and provides our mind and body the essential opportunity for restoration. Taking time for oneself is not an indulgence, it is a fundamental requirement for a harmonized and wholesome existence. Despite its many rewards, solitude can initially feel awkward or demanding. Our minds may race with unsettled thoughts, and the temptation to seek out distractions may be strong. However, it is precisely within this discomfort that the true virtue of being alone is found. It serves as an invitation to sit with our reflections, confront our anxieties, and master the art of being present with our own spirit. As we persist in this practice, it becomes increasingly natural to embrace, allowing us to fully realize its benefits. The secret to mastering solitude is to approach it without self-judgment, creating a sanctuary where we can exist free from the expectations of an audience. Solitude is not about isolation from the world. It is about being present with ourselves in a manner that nurtures evolution, self-perception, and peace. It is the realization that we are inherently sufficient without the constant need for outside confirmation or interaction. In the final assessment, we realize that detaching from the hunger for external recognition enables us to live with greater sincerity. We must release the need for public approval and instead foster self-acceptance and internal calm. As this exploration concludes, we have examined the complexities of modern existence and how it frequently pulls us in divergent directions. From the digital drive to broadcast every life detail to the dread of public scrutiny, the contemporary world is excessively loud. It is quite easy to become submerged in this noise and lose sight of our core essence. Yet, within this turbulence, there exists a significant chance to reclaim our composure, our vitality, and our sense of self. Furthermore, this journey has not merely been about bypassing social media chaos or disconnecting from cultural benchmarks. It has been about recognizing silence and solitude as robust instruments for self-realization and restoration. We have acknowledged the vital role of boundaries in defending our psychological wellness and the necessity of dismantling toxic cycles of comparison and perfectionism. Throughout these sections, we have seen that quietude is not a void to be feared but a virtue to be welcomed. In an age where transparency is the standard, choosing to remain private is a profound act of self-preservation. Silence empowers us to protect our mental environment from external demands and concentrate on what truly holds meaning. Moreover, the apprehension regarding judgment is deeply woven into the human experience, especially as digital platforms heighten our vulnerability. However, by severing the requirement for validation and constant visibility, we liberate ourselves from this anxiety. We do not need to exhibit every facet of our being to possess value. Authentic worth is an internal quality, and by establishing firm parameters, we guard our emotional energy from depletion. Similarly, we have seen that social contrast is both unproductive and damaging. Each path is incomparable, and our value is never determined by a ranking against our peers. By prioritizing our own advancement and practicing gratitude for our current position, we can detach from the urge to measure up to artificial standards. Perhaps the most critical realization is that flawlessness is a fallacy. The pressure to appear perfectly composed and successful is a heavy burden that is entirely unnecessary. Our vulnerabilities and errors are what characterize our humanity. It is through our genuine, unpolished nature that we find meaningful connection and purpose. When we abandon the quest for the ideal, we invite the opportunity for real learning and unfiltered experience. Likewise, the discipline of detachment has demonstrated that constant connectivity is not a prerequisite for a meaningful life. Disengaging from the urge to please others allows us to recover our precious time and focus on our well-being. Ultimately, solitude has proven to be a sanctuary for personal evolution. In the quiet, we find the room to perceive our true desires away from the world's interference. Solitude is the foundation of peace. This entire process has been about regaining authority over our narratives and living according to our own standards. True serenity is discovered within, not in the accolades of the external world. By valuing silence, defining our limits, and accepting our imperfections, we construct a life that is authentically our own, grounded in compassion and self-mastery. This transition is not a singular event but a continuous evolution. Each day offers a fresh chance to apply these truths, to establish new boundaries, and to embrace the quiet as a way to return to our center. Existence is naturally unpredictable and often chaotic, but it is also full of potential. By protecting our mental and emotional health, we can navigate this disorder with assurance and clarity. In the end, the most vital connection you will ever foster is the one you have with yourself. When you respect and care for your own spirit, you no longer require the world to validate your existence. You recognize your own worth, accept your unique flaws, and realize that being yourself is, and always will be, more than enough.